The desert wind carried dust and the scent of danger as Marine Staff Sergeant Jake Mitchell crouched behind a crumbling wall in the abandoned village of Al Rashid. His dog, Rex, a German shepherd trained for explosive detection, pressed close to his side. The black fur on Rex's back stood up, and his ears twitched at sounds only he could hear. Jake had been in Afghanistan for 8 months. This mission was supposed to be routine, check the village for hidden weapons and explosives. But nothing felt routine anymore. The Taliban had been more active lately, and American forces were stretched thin across the region. Clear on the north side, came the crackling voice through Jake's radio. That was Corporal Martinez, his partner for this sweep. They had worked together for 6 months, and Jake trusted him with his life. Rex suddenly stiffened. His nose went up, sniffing the air with intense focus. Jake knew that look. The dog had detected something, either explosives or people hiding nearby. Rex had never been wrong before. "What is it, boy?" Jake whispered, running his hand along Rex's neck to calm him. The village looked empty. Broken windows stared like dead eyes from mud brick houses. Children's toys lay scattered in the dusty streets, a reminder that families once lived here before the war drove them away. Now only ghosts and enemies remained. Jake checked his watch. 1,400 hours. They had been searching for 2 hours and found nothing. Command wanted them back at base before dark. The desert became a different kind of dangerous when the sun went down. Rex's low growl made Jake's blood run cold. The dog's training kicked in, and he dropped into a perfect alert position. His body pointed toward a cluster of buildings 50 meters ahead. Jake followed the dog's gaze and saw movement in a doorway. "Martinez, we've got company," Jake spoke quietly into his radio. "Rex is indicating multiple contacts ahead." Static answered him. Then, more static. "Martinez, do you copy?" Jake tried again, louder this time. Nothing. Jake's heart began to pound. In 8 months of combat, his radio had never failed him. Someone was jamming the signal. That meant they were walking into a trap. Rex whined softly and looked up at Jake with intelligent brown eyes. The dog seemed to understand the danger they faced. Jake had seen that same look during their training back in North Carolina. Rex always knew when something was wrong before Jake did. The sun beat down mercilessly. Sweat dripped into Jake's eyes as he tried to decide what to do. Protocol said to fall back and call for backup when communications failed. But Martinez was somewhere in this village, possibly in trouble. Jake had grown up in rural Montana with his grandfather, a Vietnam veteran who taught him that you never leave a fellow soldier behind. That lesson was burned into Jake's soul deeper than any military training. "We're going to find Martinez," Jake told Rex. "Stay close and keep your nose up." They moved through the village like shadows. Jake kept his rifle ready while Rex used his superior senses to guide them around danger. The dog had already saved Jake's life 3 times by detecting hidden explosives. Jake owed everything to this 4-legged warrior. The silence felt heavy and wrong. No birds sang. No insects buzzed. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Jake had learned to read the signs of an ambush during his tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. Every instinct screamed that they were being watched. They reached the building where Rex had first detected movement. Jake pressed his back against the wall and listened. Muffled voices came from inside, speaking Arabic in hushed, urgent tones. Jake's limited language skills picked up a few words: American, dog, and kill. His blood turned to ice water. Rex's ears flattened against his head. The dog sensed Jake's fear and pressed closer to his legs. They had walked into something much bigger than a routine patrol. This was a carefully planned ambush. Jake tried his radio again. Still nothing but static. Somewhere in this maze of buildings, Martinez might already be captured or dead. Jake was alone with only Rex for backup, facing an unknown number of enemies who had been preparing for this moment. The voices inside the building grew louder. Jake counted at least 4 different men arguing about something. Through a crack in the wall, he caught a glimpse of weapons, AK-47s and what looked like an RPG launcher. Rex suddenly froze and stared at a building across the street. His nose twitched, and his tail went rigid. Someone else was moving through the village. Jake prayed it was Martinez, but his gut told him otherwise. A figure appeared in a doorway 60 meters away. The man wore civilian clothes but carried a rifle. He was scanning the streets methodically, hunting for something. Or someone. Jake realized the truth with crystal clarity. This wasn't a random encounter. The Taliban had intelligence about their patrol route. They knew exactly when and where American forces would be searching. Someone had betrayed them. The betrayal explained the jammed radio and the perfect positioning of the ambush. Jake and Martinez had walked into a kill zone designed specifically for them. The enemy wanted them alive for propaganda purposes, or dead as a message to other American forces. Rex's training as a military working dog included combat situations. The German Shepherd had been selected not just for his nose, but for his courage and loyalty under fire. Jake had seen Rex remain calm during mortar attacks and firefights. The dog was a true warrior. But this felt different. They were outnumbered and cut off from support. Jake's ammunition was limited, and he had no idea how many enemies surrounded them. The smart move was to retreat and call for air support. Rex looked up at Jake with complete trust. The dog would follow him anywhere, even into certain death. That trust made Jake's chest tighten with emotion. Rex didn't understand politics or war. He only understood loyalty and duty. The voices from the building suddenly stopped. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs as he realized they had been discovered. Footsteps moved toward the door where he and Rex were hiding. Jake chambered around in his rifle and clicked off the safety. Rex sensed the change in his handler's energy and shifted into attack position. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The door burst open, and 3 armed men rushed out into the street. They moved with military precision, sweeping their weapons left and right as they searched for the American soldiers they knew were nearby. Jake held his breath and pressed deeper into the shadows. Rex remained perfectly still, every muscle coiled like a spring. The dog's training had taught him when to attack and when to wait for commands. One of the gunmen stopped less than 10 feet from their hiding spot. He spoke rapidly into a handheld radio in Arabic. Jake caught enough words to understand that the net was closing. More fighters were moving into position to surround them. The afternoon sun climbed higher, and the temperature soared past 110 degrees. Jake's uniform was soaked with sweat, and his mouth felt like sandpaper. Rex panted quietly, his pink tongue hanging out as he tried to stay cool. Time was running out. Soon the enemy would complete their encirclement, and escape would become impossible. Jake had to make a choice: try to fight their way out now, or wait and hope for a miracle. Rex made the choice for him. The dog's sensitive ears picked up a sound Jake couldn't hear: the whisper of footsteps on sand behind them. Rex spun around and growled, warning Jake that enemies were approaching from their rear. Jake turned to see 2 more armed men creeping toward their position. The trap was already closing. They were surrounded with nowhere to run. The lead gunman raised his AK-47 and shouted something in Arabic. Jake didn't need a translation. They had been ordered to surrender or die. Rex's growl deepened into a snarl that would have terrified a wolf. The German Shepherd stepped protectively in front of Jake, ready to fight impossible odds to defend his handler. Jake's training kicked in. He raised his rifle and acquired his first target. But, with 5 armed men positioned around them, the mathematics of survival looked grim. Even if he took down 2 or 3 enemies, the others would kill him and Rex. The lead gunman shouted again, more urgently this time. Jake understood enough Arabic to know they wanted him alive for questioning. That might give him a slight advantage, but it wouldn't save Rex. Military dogs were considered equipment by the enemy, not prisoners of war. Rex's loyalty meant he would fight to the death rather than let anyone harm Jake. That loyalty was about to get them both killed. Jake's finger tightened on the trigger as he prepared for the fight of his life. He thought about his sister back home in Montana, who had begged him not to enlist. He thought about his grandfather's war stories and the promise he had made to always bring his men home safe. Most of all, he thought about Rex, the brave dog who had never failed him, never questioned an order, never shown fear in the face of danger. If they were going to die, at least they would die together as warriors. The lead gunman took another step forward and repeated his demand. Jake could see the man's finger moving toward the trigger of his rifle. Time slowed to a crawl as Jake prepared to fire the first shot of what would likely be their last battle. Rex sensed the moment of decision. The dog's muscles bunched as he prepared to launch himself at the nearest threat. His brown eyes met Jake's for one final moment of understanding between partners who had shared everything. Then, all hell broke loose in the streets of Al-Rashid. The first gunshot echoed through the village like thunder. But it hadn't come from Jake or the Taliban fighters surrounding him. Someone else was in the fight now. Chief Petty Officer Marcus "Ghost" Rodriguez had been watching the ambush unfold from a rooftop 200 meters away. His SEAL team had been conducting their own classified mission when they intercepted Taliban radio chatter about captured Americans. Marcus lowered his sniper rifle after taking out the lead gunman with a perfect headshot. His team of 4 Navy SEALs had been operating in this region for 3 weeks, hunting high-value targets. They weren't supposed to be here, but SEALs never left fellow Americans to die. Overwatch has neutralized 1 Tango, Marcus spoke quietly into his throat microphone. Marine and his dog are pinned down in the courtyard. Count 4 more hostiles visible. Petty Officer First Class Tony Breacher Washington crouched behind a collapsed wall with his K9 partner, Cairo. The Belgian Malinois was smaller than Rex but equally deadly. Cairo had been trained not just for detection work, but for direct combat operations. His dark fur and intense yellow eyes made him look like a wolf in the desert heat. Cairo's picking up more movement to the east, Tony reported. Looks like we interrupted a bigger party than expected. The remaining Taliban fighters scattered for cover when their leader dropped. They had planned for 2 isolated Americans, not a SEAL sniper providing overwatch. Their carefully orchestrated ambush was falling apart. Jake used the confusion to move Rex behind better cover. The German Shepherd stayed low and followed his handler's commands perfectly, even with bullets flying overhead. 8 months of combat had taught Rex to trust Jake's leadership completely. "American soldiers," shouted one of the Taliban fighters in broken English. "You are surrounded. Surrender now or we kill your friend." Jake's heart stopped. They had Martinez. Marcus watched through his rifle scope as 2 more Taliban fighters emerged from a building, dragging a wounded Marine between them. Corporal Martinez was alive but bleeding from a head wound. His hands were zip-tied behind his back. "They've got the other Marine," Marcus reported to his team. "He's injured but mobile. We need to move fast before they execute him." Petty Officer Second Class David Dokchen was the team's medic, but his primary weapon was a modified M4 carbine with an underbarrel grenade launcher. He had positioned himself to cut off the Taliban's escape routes through the village's main street. "I've got eyes on 3 more Tangos moving through the buildings," Doc reported. "They're trying to flank our position from the south." The 4th member of the SEAL team, Petty Officer Second Class Alex Ninja Kowalski, was already moving through the village like his nickname suggested. Alex specialized in close-quarters combat and had an uncanny ability to appear behind enemies without making a sound. Marcus made the tactical decision. "Breacher, take Cairo and provide support to the Marine and his dog. Doc, cover our 6 and watch for reinforcements. Ninja, you're with me. We're going to get the captured Marine back." Tony and Cairo moved through the ruins with practiced precision. The SEAL and his dog had worked together for 2 years, conducting raids across 3 different countries. They communicated without words, reading each other's body language like a married couple. Rex spotted Cairo first. The German Shepherd's hackles rose as he saw another military dog approaching their position. But Rex's training included working with other K9 teams, and he quickly recognized Cairo's tactical harness and professional bearing. "Easy, Rex," Jake whispered. "They're friendlies. Tony reached Jake's position and slid into cover beside him. Chief Petty Officer Washington, Navy SEALs. We're here to get you out of this mess. Jake had never been happier to hear an American voice. Staff Sergeant Mitchell, Marines. They've got my partner, Martinez. He's wounded. We know, Tony said. My chief is working on that. Right now we need to keep you and your dog alive long enough for extraction. Cairo sniffed Rex cautiously, then settled into a defensive position. The two dogs seemed to understand they were now part of the same pack, united against a common enemy. Marcus and Alex moved through the village like deadly shadows. Both men had years of experience in urban combat environments. They could read the layout of streets and buildings, predicting where enemies would position themselves. The Taliban fighters holding Martinez had taken cover in a partially destroyed mosque. Using a religious building as a military position violated the rules of war, but the Taliban had never cared about such niceties. Target building is the mosque with the blue dome, Marcus whispered to Alex. Two hostiles visible, probably more inside. We need them alive for intelligence if possible, but not at the cost of the Marine's life. Alex nodded and began circling around to the building's rear entrance. His specialty was getting inside structures without being detected. He moved like liquid mercury, flowing around obstacles without disturbing so much as a pebble. The Taliban commander inside the mosque was growing desperate. His perfect ambush had turned into a nightmare. Someone had called for backup, and now his men were dying one by one. He needed to salvage something from this disaster. American sniper, the commander shouted in Arabic accented English. I know you can hear me. I have your soldier. Withdraw your men, or I cut his throat. Marcus could see Martinez through his rifle scope. The Marine was conscious but dazed. Blood from his head wound had dried in the heat, and his face showed the strain of his ordeal. But his eyes were alert, watching for any opportunity to escape. Negative on the withdrawal, Marcus spoke into his radio for the Taliban to hear. But we can discuss terms. What do you want? The negotiation was a stalling tactic. While the Taliban commander focused on the radio conversation, Alex was already inside the mosque, moving through shadows toward the room where they held Martinez. Back in the courtyard, Jake and Tony were dealing with the remaining Taliban fighters who still thought they had the Americans trapped. Rex and Cairo worked together, using their superior hearing and scent detection to warn their handlers about approaching enemies. Two more coming from the left, Tony whispered, watching Cairo's alert signals. Jake shifted position and acquired the targets through his rifle sights. These Taliban fighters were younger and less experienced than their leader. They moved with the reckless confidence of men who had never faced professional soldiers before. Doc's voice crackled through the radio, "Be advised, I'm seeing vehicle movement on the road outside the village. Looks like reinforcements inbound, ETA 5 minutes." The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. More Taliban fighters meant the odds would shift back against the Americans. They needed to end this engagement quickly and get out of the village before being overwhelmed. Marcus made another decision that would define the next few minutes of combat. All stations, we're going loud in 30 seconds. Breacher, lay down suppressing fire and advance on the mosque. Doc, engage those vehicles before they reach the village perimeter. The coordinated assault began with Marcus taking out the Taliban lookout on the mosque's minaret. His .308 round dropped the man instantly, clearing the way for the ground assault. Alex struck at the same moment, using his knife to silently eliminate the guard watching Martinez. The Taliban commander spun around in shock, reaching for his weapon, but found himself staring down the barrel of Alex's pistol. "Don't," Alex said quietly in perfect Arabic. "Your men are already dead." Tony and Cairo charged across the courtyard with Rex and Jake close behind. The remaining Taliban fighters opened fire, but their aim was wild and panicked. They had expected to fight isolated Marines, not a coordinated assault by Navy SEALs. Cairo reached the first gunman before the man could reload his AK-47. The Belgian Malinois hit him like a furry missile, knocking the rifle from his hands and driving him to the ground. The dog's training took over, and he held the man down without mauling him. Rex followed Cairo's example, using his size and strength to overwhelm the second gunman. The German Shepherd had been trained for detection work, but months of combat had awakened his protective instincts. He would do anything to keep Jake safe. Doc's grenade launcher spoke with authority, sending 40mm rounds into the approaching Taliban vehicles. The first truck exploded in a ball of orange flame and black smoke. The second vehicle swerved off the road and crashed into a ditch. Vehicles neutralized, Doc reported. But we need to move. Local forces will respond to all this noise. Marcus reached the mosque as Alex emerged with Martinez. The rescued Marine was wobbly but walking under his own power. His head wound looked worse than it was. Scalp cuts always bled heavily in the desert heat. How many fingers am I holding up? Doc asked Martinez while checking his pupils for signs of concussion. 3, Martinez replied. And I'm fine to fight. You're fine to walk, Doc corrected. Fighting is off the table until we get you to a proper medical facility. The SEAL team began their extraction procedure with military efficiency. They had rehearsed this type of operation hundreds of times in training. Every movement was calculated to get them out of the danger zone as quickly as possible. Tony gathered intelligence from the captured Taliban fighters while Cairo stood guard. The dog's yellow eyes never left the prisoners, ready to attack if any of them made a threatening move. They were definitely waiting for us specifically, Tony reported. Someone leaked our patrol route and timing. This was a setup from the beginning. Jake felt sick to his stomach. The thought that someone on their own side had betrayed them made his blood boil. Good soldiers had almost died because of treachery within their own ranks. Rex sensed Jake's emotional turmoil and pressed against his legs for comfort. The dog didn't understand military politics or betrayal. He only knew that Jake was upset, and Rex wanted to help. Marcus checked his watch. We've got a helicopter inbound for extraction in 20 minutes. Everyone needs to be ready to move when they arrive. The SEAL team set up a defensive perimeter around the mosque while they waited for their ride home. Cairo and Rex worked together, using their combined senses to monitor for any approaching threats. Both dogs had proven themselves in combat today. They had stayed calm under fire, followed orders perfectly, and protected their handlers without hesitation. The bond between soldier and dog had been forged in the crucible of battle. As they waited for extraction, Jake realized how close he and Rex had come to dying. Without the SEAL team's intervention, they would have been captured or killed in that courtyard. Sometimes survival came down to luck and the kindness of strangers who risked everything to help fellow Americans. The distant sound of helicopter rotors began to echo across the desert. Their ride home was approaching, but Jake knew this mission would haunt him for years to come. Someone had betrayed them, and until that traitor was found, no American soldier in Afghanistan was truly safe. Rex looked up at Jake with those intelligent brown eyes, completely trusting and utterly loyal. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as they always had, one man and his dog against the world. The helicopter ride back to Forward Operating Base Chapman felt longer than usual. Jake sat in the noisy cabin with Rex pressed against his legs, both of them still processing what had happened in Al Rashid village. The SEAL team had saved their lives, but the question of betrayal hung in the air like smoke from a burning building. Martinez sat across from them, his head wrapped in white bandages that Doc had applied during the flight. The Marine's eyes were clear now, and anger had replaced the confusion from his concussion. Someone had sold them out, and Martinez wanted answers just as badly as Jake did. Chief Rodriguez sat near the door, his rifle across his knees and his eyes scanning the desert below. Even during extraction, SEALs never stopped being vigilant. He caught Jake's attention and leaned over to speak above the helicopter noise. When we get back to base, intelligence is going to want to debrief all of us, Marcus shouted. But I think you should know this wasn't random. Someone with access to your mission planning fed information to the Taliban. Jake's stomach clenched. The betrayal wasn't just about leaked patrol routes. Someone with security clearance had deliberately set up American soldiers to be killed or captured. The thought made his hands shake with rage. Rex sensed Jake's emotional state and whined softly. The German Shepherd had been unusually quiet during the flight, as if he understood the gravity of what had occurred. Dogs could read human emotions better than most people realized. The helicopter touched down at Chapman with a cloud of dust and sand. The base was a sprawling collection of concrete barriers, prefabricated buildings, and communication towers surrounded by miles of empty desert. It was home to nearly 3,000 American and Allied personnel. Jake and Martinez were immediately whisked away to the medical facility for evaluation. Rex trotted alongside them, refusing to leave Jake's side despite the chaos of medics and military police asking questions. Dr. Sarah Collins was the base's chief medical officer, a former Army surgeon who had volunteered for deployment in Afghanistan. She examined Martinez's head wound with professional efficiency while asking pointed questions about his capture. "How long were you unconscious?" she asked, shining a penlight into his eyes. "Maybe 10 minutes, Martinez replied. "I remember being grabbed from behind, then waking up with my hands tied in that building." "Did you hear any conversations while you were captive? Any names or locations mentioned?" Martinez concentrated, trying to recall details through the fog of his concussion. "They kept talking about someone called the Professor. Seemed like he was the one who gave them our information." Jake's blood ran cold. The Professor was a code name that had appeared in several intelligence reports over the past months. Someone high up in the American command structure was feeding information to Taliban forces. But nobody had been able to identify the traitor. Dr. Collins finished her examination and declared both Marines fit for duty. "You're lucky," she told Martinez. "That head wound could have been much worse. Take it easy for the next 48 hours. As they left the medical facility, Jake noticed unusual activity around the base headquarters. Military police were setting up roadblocks, and officers were checking identification more carefully than usual. Something big was happening. Master Sergeant William Bear Thompson was waiting for them outside the medical building. Bear was the base's senior dog handler, a 20-year veteran who had worked with military dogs in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Somalia. He took one look at Rex and nodded approvingly. "Heard your boy performed well under fire," Bear said, kneeling down to let Rex sniff his hand. "Good dogs always know when their handlers are in trouble." "Rex saved my life more than once today," Jake replied. "If he hadn't detected those Taliban fighters, we would have walked straight into their kill zone." Bear stood up and brushed dust off his knees. "Intelligence wants to debrief you both in 1 hour. But, first, I need to tell you something in private." They walked to the K9 facility, a cluster of air-conditioned kennels where the base's military working dogs lived when they weren't on duty. Rex immediately relaxed in the familiar environment, greeting the other dogs with tail wags and playful barks. Bear led them into his office and closed the door. The walls were covered with photos of soldiers and their dogs from deployments spanning 2 decades. Each picture told a story of partnership, sacrifice, and loyalty that went beyond ordinary human relationships. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room," Bear said seriously. "Intelligence has been investigating the information leaks for 3 months. They think someone in the S2 shop has been passing patrol schedules and mission plans to Taliban contacts. The S2 shop was military intelligence, the people responsible for gathering information about enemy activities and protecting friendly operations. If someone in that unit was compromised, it explained how the Taliban had known exactly when and where to set their ambush." "Do they have any suspects?" Martinez asked, gingerly touching his bandaged head. "3 possibilities," Bear replied. "But here's the thing, they need proof. Accusations of treason aren't made lightly in the military. One wrong move, and careers get destroyed permanently." Jake felt frustration building in his chest. While intelligence played politics and gathered evidence, American soldiers were dying because of a traitor in their midst. Every day that passed meant more ambushes and more good people coming home in body bags. Rex seemed to sense the tension in the room. The dog moved closer to Jake and rested his head on his handler's knee. The simple gesture of loyalty and trust reminded Jake why he had volunteered for this deployment. It wasn't about politics or career advancement, it was about protecting the people who mattered. A knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Lieutenant Colonel David Harrison entered without waiting for permission. Harrison was the base intelligence officer, a career soldier with a reputation for thoroughness and integrity. His presence meant the investigation had reached a critical phase. "Gentlemen, I need to speak with you about today's incident," Harrison said, taking his seat across from them. "But first, I want you to know that your actions probably prevented a much larger disaster." Harrison pulled out a tablet and showed them aerial photographs of Al-Rashid village taken after their extraction. The images revealed evidence of a much larger Taliban force than they had encountered: weapons caches, vehicle positions, and fighting positions that could have held 50 or more fighters. "Intelligence intercepts suggest they were planning to use your capture as bait for a larger ambush," Harrison explained. "They wanted to draw in rescue forces and inflict mass casualties. Your early detection and the SEAL team's intervention disrupted a major enemy operation." The revelation made Jake feel sick. The Taliban hadn't just wanted to capture or kill 2 Marines, they had planned to use them as bait for a trap that could have killed dozens of American soldiers. The betrayal ran deeper than anyone had imagined. "Sir, what can you tell us about this professor character?" Martinez asked. "I heard them mention that name several times." Harrison's expression grew grim. "The professor is our designation for a high-level intelligence source within our own command structure. For 6 months, he's been providing Taliban forces with detailed information about our operations. Today's ambush was just the latest in a series of compromised missions." Jake clenched his fists. "How close are you to identifying him?" "Closer than we've ever been," Harrison replied. "The intelligence you gathered today, combined with communications intercepts and pattern analysis, has narrowed our suspect list significantly. We believe the professor is one of 3 people with access to the specific information that was leaked." Bear leaned forward in his chair. "What do you need from us?" "Complete cooperation and absolute secrecy," Harrison said. "We're going to conduct a controlled information operation. Each suspect will receive different false information about upcoming missions. Whichever false intelligence shows up in Taliban communications will identify our traitor." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. By feeding each suspect different lies and monitoring enemy communications, intelligence could trace the information flow and identify the professor. But it also meant more American lives would be at risk during the operation. "How long will this take?" Jake asked. 72 hours, Harrison replied. "We'll feed the false information tomorrow, monitor enemy communications for 24 hours, then move to arrest the traitor. After that, we can roll up his entire network and eliminate the intelligence leak permanently." Jake looked down at Rex, who was sleeping peacefully at his feet. The dog trusted Jake completely, just as Jake had to trust that intelligence knew what they were doing. But trust was a dangerous commodity in a war zone where betrayal could come from your own side. Harrison stood to leave, then paused at the door. "One more thing, I want you to know that Chief Rodriguez and his SEAL team volunteered to stay on base for the next few days. They're convinced this case is bigger than one traitor, and they want to see it through to the end." After Harrison left, Bear poured coffee from a pot that had been brewing since early morning. The bitter liquid tasted like diesel fuel, but it helped cut through the emotional exhaustion of the day's events. 20 years in this business, and betrayal still hurts the worst," Bear said quietly. "Enemy bullets you can see coming. Roadside bombs leave evidence. But when someone on your own side sells you out, it cuts deeper than any wound." Jake nodded, understanding exactly what Bear meant. Military service was built on trust in your equipment, your training, and, most importantly, your fellow soldiers. When that trust was broken, it damaged something fundamental about the warrior's code. Rex woke up and stretched, looking around the room with alert eyes. The dog had no concept of military politics or intelligence operations. For him, the world was divided into simple categories: pack members to protect, enemies to detect, and missions to complete. "What happens to us while intelligence runs their operation?" Martinez asked. You continue normal duties, Bear replied. Patrols, training, maintenance. The key is acting like nothing has changed while intelligence gathers their evidence. If the professor suspects we're onto him, he might run or destroy evidence. Jake thought about the Taliban fighters they had faced in Al-Rashid village. Those men had been willing to die for their cause, misguided though it was. But the professor was selling out his own countrymen for money or ideology. That kind of betrayal was worse than honest enemy fire. The next 3 days would determine whether justice was served or whether more American soldiers died because of treachery within their own ranks. Jake looked down at Rex and made a silent promise: whatever happened, he would protect the dog who had risked everything to save his life. Outside the K9 facility, the sun was setting over the Afghan desert. Another day in the war zone was ending, but Jake knew the real battle was just beginning. The fight to expose the professor and eliminate his network would test everything they had learned about loyalty, courage, and sacrifice. Rex yawned and settled back down for another nap, completely confident that Jake would handle whatever challenges lay ahead. That simple trust was both a gift and a burden, the responsibility to be worthy of such complete loyalty from another living being. The hunt for the professor was about to begin, and Jake intended to see it through to the end, no matter what the cost. The trap was set at dawn on the third day. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison had fed 3 different pieces of false intelligence to his 3 suspects, each containing specific details that would be impossible to confuse or combine. Now they waited to see which lie would surface in Taliban communications. Jake sat in the K9 facility with Rex, maintaining their normal routine while the investigation played out in the background. The German Shepherd sensed the tension on base and stayed closer to Jake than usual. Dogs always knew when their humans were worried about something beyond their control. Chief Rodriguez and his SEAL team had established a temporary command post in the base communications center. Their specialized equipment could monitor Taliban radio frequencies in real time, listening for any mention of the false intelligence that had been distributed. At 0800 hours, the first intercept came through. Taliban fighters in the Kunar province were discussing American patrol schedules that matched exactly with the false information given to Major Patricia Wells, the assistant intelligence officer. She had been with the unit for 8 months and held a top-secret security clearance. "That's our first hit," Alex Kowalski reported from his position at the monitoring station. Major Wells' information just showed up in enemy communications. But Harrison wasn't ready to make an arrest yet. Military justice required overwhelming evidence before accusing a commissioned officer of treason. One intercept could be coincidence or clever misdirection by the real traitor. At 1200 hours, a second intercept confirmed Taliban knowledge of false information that had been given to Captain Robert Chen, the unit's communications officer. Chen had access to virtually every classified message that moved through the base, making him a perfect candidate for espionage. Martinez found Jake in the motor pool, where they were performing routine maintenance on their patrol vehicle. The Marine's head wound was healing well, but he still wore a small bandage over the stitches where the Taliban had clubbed him unconscious. "This is driving me crazy," Martinez said, checking the tire pressure for the 3rd time. "Knowing there's a traitor on base but not being able to do anything about it." Jake understood the frustration. Military training emphasized action and decisiveness. Waiting while other people gathered evidence went against every instinct they had developed as combat soldiers. But sometimes the hardest battles were fought with patience and intelligence rather than bullets and explosives. Rex lifted his head from where he had been napping in the vehicle's shade. The dog's ears perked up at the sound of approaching footsteps, multiple people walking with military precision across the gravel. Jake turned to see Bear Thompson approaching with Chief Rodriguez and Doc Chen. "We need to talk," Bear said seriously. "There's been a development." They gathered in the secure briefing room where classified information could be discussed without fear of eavesdropping. Bear activated a white noise generator that would mask their conversation from any electronic surveillance devices. "Third intercept came in 30 minutes ago," Chief Rodriguez reported. "Taliban forces in Helmand province are repositioning based on false intelligence given to Sergeant First Class Michael Torres, the intelligence analyst." Jake felt confused. Torres was an enlisted soldier, not an officer. He had access to classified information, but not the high-level strategic intelligence that the professor had been leaking for months. Something didn't add up about this pattern. All three suspects have been compromised? Martinez asked. How is that possible? Chen pulled out his laptop and showed them a communications analysis chart. That's what we thought at first, but the pattern is wrong. Look at the timing and detail level of each intercept. The chart revealed subtle but important differences in how the Taliban had received and processed each piece of false intelligence. Some information had been passed along immediately with complete accuracy. Other details had been delayed or slightly altered, suggesting they had traveled through different channels. There's more than one leak, Baer concluded. The professor isn't working alone. The revelation hit Jake like a physical blow. They weren't hunting a single traitor, they were dealing with an espionage network that had infiltrated multiple levels of the base's command structure. The scope of the betrayal was far worse than anyone had imagined. Chief Rodriguez activated his secure radio. Overwatch to base command, we have a code red intelligence situation. Request immediate lockdown protocols and arrest authorization for multiple suspects. Within minutes, military police units were moving across the base with predetermined target lists. The investigation had moved from passive surveillance to active arrests. 3 separate teams would simultaneously detain all 3 suspects to prevent communication or evidence destruction. Jake and Martinez were assigned to observe the arrest of Sergeant Torres, the intelligence analyst. The young soldier was in the base dining facility, eating lunch and chatting with fellow enlisted personnel as if he didn't have a care in the world. Hard to believe someone that young could betray his own country, Martinez whispered as they watched from across the room. But Jake had learned that betrayal came in many forms. Some people sold out for money, others for ideology, and still others because they had been compromised through blackmail or coercion. The reasons mattered less than the consequences. American soldiers died when classified information reached enemy hands. The arrest happened quickly and professionally. Military police approached Torres from multiple directions, preventing any possibility of escape or resistance. The sergeant looked genuinely shocked when they read him his rights and placed him in handcuffs. Rex watched the arrest with professional interest but no emotional reaction. The dog understood that some humans were threats to be detected and neutralized, but he didn't judge them for their choices. That kind of moral complexity was beyond canine comprehension. Similar scenes played out across the base as Major Wells and Captain Chen were also taken into custody. Each arrest had been carefully choreographed to happen simultaneously, preventing the suspects from warning each other or destroying evidence. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison convened an emergency briefing in the command center at 1600 hours. The room was packed with senior officers, investigation teams, and the personnel who had been directly affected by the intelligence leaks. Jake and Martinez sat in the back with Rex lying quietly at Jake's feet. Preliminary interrogations have revealed the scope of the espionage network, Harrison announced. Sergeant Torres was recruited 18 months ago through a fake social media profile that targeted military personnel with gambling debts. He was providing tactical-level intelligence about patrol schedules and base security procedures. The gambling connection explained how Torres had been compromised. Debt was one of the classic vulnerabilities that foreign intelligence services exploited to recruit American military personnel. A few bad bets could destroy a career and create opportunities for blackmail. Major Wells was providing strategic intelligence about force deployments and long-term operations planning, Harrison continued. Her motivation appears to be ideological. She had developed anti-war sentiments and believed she was saving lives by helping the Taliban avoid American forces. Jake felt sick hearing about Wells' justification. The major had convinced herself that betraying American soldiers was actually a humanitarian act. That kind of twisted logic could rationalize almost any betrayal. Captain Chen is still being interrogated, but initial indications suggest he was recruited through a romantic relationship with a foreign national. Classic honey trap operation that compromised his access to communications intelligence. The 3 suspects represented different categories of insider threats that military security personnel had to guard against constantly. Financial pressure, ideological conversion, and personal relationships were the most common vulnerabilities that enemy agents exploited. Chief Rodriguez stood up to address the room. My team's intercept operations have identified at least 12 major intelligence compromises over the past 6 months. These leaks resulted in 17 American casualties and the loss of numerous high-value targets who escaped capture because they had advance warning. The human cost of the betrayal was staggering. 17 families had received folded flags and final letters from loved ones who died because someone had sold them out. Jake thought about his own close call in Al Rashid village and realized how many other soldiers had faced similar situations without the benefit of SEAL team intervention. "What happens to them now?" asked Major Sarah Davidson, the base's staff judge advocate. "Courts-martial for all 3, Harrison replied. Treason charges carry potential death sentences under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. At minimum, they're looking at life imprisonment without possibility of parole." Jake felt no satisfaction at the prospect of execution or life sentences for the traitors. Justice was necessary, but it wouldn't bring back the soldiers who had died because of leaked intelligence. The damage was done, and no amount of punishment could undo it. Rex sensed Jake's emotional state and pressed closer against his legs. The dog's simple presence was comforting in a way that words could never be. Rex represented everything that was good about military service: loyalty, courage, and selfless dedication to protecting others. Over the following weeks, the base began to heal from the trauma of discovering traitors within their own ranks. New security procedures were implemented, and psychological counseling was made available for personnel who felt betrayed by the revelations. Jake and Martinez returned to their normal patrol duties, but with enhanced security protocols and different routes to prevent future ambushes. Rex seemed to enjoy the variety of new areas to explore, approaching each mission with the same enthusiasm he had shown from the beginning. The courts-martial proceedings were swift and thorough. All 3 suspects were convicted on multiple charges of treason, espionage, and providing material support to enemy forces. Torres received life imprisonment, Wells was sentenced to death, and Chen got 30 years without parole. Chief Rodriguez and his SEAL team finally returned to their own unit, but not before establishing lasting friendships with the Marines they had rescued. Military brotherhood transcended service rivalries when lives were on the line. On Jake's final day in Afghanistan, he sat with Rex in the same spot where they had first met Bear Thompson 9 months earlier. The German Shepherd was grayer around the muzzle and moved a little slower than when they had arrived, but his eyes still held the same intelligence and loyalty that had saved Jake's life countless times. "Ready to go home, boy?" Jake asked, scratching behind Rex's ears. The dog looked up at him with complete trust, ready to follow wherever Jake led. Home was wherever they were together, whether in the mountains of Afghanistan, the plains of Montana, or anywhere else their service might take them. Bear Thompson appeared with the paperwork for Rex's retirement ceremony. After 8 years of military service, the German Shepherd had earned the right to spend his remaining years as a civilian dog. Jake had already signed the adoption papers that would make their partnership permanent. "He's one of the best dogs I've ever worked with," Bear said admiringly. "Saved more lives than we'll ever know." Jake nodded, thinking about all the explosives Rex had detected, all the hidden enemies he had warned about, and all the missions he had helped complete successfully. But, most of all, Jake remembered the loyalty and trust that had sustained them both through the darkest moments of war. The transport plane that would take them home was waiting on the runway, its engines already spinning up for departure. Jake clipped Rex's leash to his collar, not because the dog would run away, but because regulations required it for air travel. They walked across the tarmac together, 2 warriors heading home after serving their country with honor and distinction. Behind them, other soldiers continued the mission of fighting terrorism and protecting innocent people from extremist violence. Rex climbed into the aircraft without hesitation, settling into the travel kennel that would carry him safely back to America. Through the kennel's wire door, his brown eyes met Jake's one final time in the war zone where they had become brothers in arms. The plane lifted off from Afghanistan as the sun set over the Hindu Kush Mountains. Jake looked out the window at the landscape where he had learned the true meaning of loyalty, sacrifice, and brotherhood. The memories of war would fade with time, but the bond between a soldier and his dog would last forever. Rex slept peacefully in his kennel, dreaming perhaps of Montana grasslands and peaceful days without the stress of combat operations. He had earned that peace through years of faithful service and unwavering loyalty to the soldiers who depended on him. As the plane flew west toward home, Jake made a silent promise to honor Rex's service by living a life worthy of such complete trust and dedication. The war in Afghanistan would eventually end, but the lessons learned from a German shepherd's courage would endure for generations to come.